In Genesis 20, verses 1 through 7, Abraham and his wife Sarah are traveling to a Philistine settlement west of the Dead Sea, maybe to get farther away from what has just happened, the destruction of Sodom. And so for whatever reason, they find themselves traveling, coming to a new area, and it has been less than 3 months since God had promised that Sarah would give Abraham a son back in chapter 18. And as they travel, Abraham lies once again about Sarah being his sister rather than his wife. And he did it previously in chapter 12, verses 11 through 13, as he and Sarah had entered Egypt and they dealt with Pharaoh. Now, his rationale was one of self-preservation in his lying. And as he traveled, he thought, you know what? If others knew that Sarah was my wife, they would kill me and then take her. But if they only thought that she was my sister, my own life would be spared. And even at 90 years old here, we realize Sarah must have been quite beautiful and caught the attention of everybody. And in other words, this situation amounts to this. He treated Sarah as a bargaining chip instead of a human being, his own wife. He trusted more in his own ability to manipulate a situation than trusting the leadership, guidance, and protection of God. Also, he put her life and her dignity at risk through all of this. And so it happens here in this chapter once again as they travel to another land. And he lies again about who she is to preserve himself. And he actually gives her up to King Abimelech, who took her as another wife. And this puts into jeopardy the promises of God to Abraham that she would bear him a son. And so all that's up in the air. Abraham's fear and selfishness is on the brink of costing him all of the things that God had wanted to do in his life, everything he wanted to do through him. And after waiting for 25 years for a son, how could he now, through this instance, throw it all away? But as it happens, God tells Abimelech in a dream that Sarah is actually Abraham's wife and not his sister. So Abimelech tells God, hey, I didn't know that, and I am innocent of any fault in this. I was unaware. And God agrees with him, and he has him return Sarah to Abraham or face death himself and the death of, quote, all who are his. And so God does provide her safe return to Abraham from Abimelech. And through this, we see a few things here that we can really learn from. Abraham took matters into his own hands instead of trusting God. And when you hear that, just think about how many times we do the same. I know I can think of times I've done the same. What makes sense to us in the moment, in certain circumstances, might not be the best course of action. In fact, God uses seemingly impossible scenarios to demonstrate his power and goodness to us. And we should trust him always, despite what the circumstance seems like. Second thing is that this unbelieving king Abimelech does the right thing and not the prophet Abraham. He tries to make things right, doing the more virtuous thing, standing in contrast with Abraham's behavior. So this is an instance where the man of God fails and another does what is right instead. So how humiliating this must have been for Abraham. And these types of scenarios in life should humble us and point to our constant need of God and his leadership in all that we do. We must remain consistently close to him. And lastly, we see that God holds to his promises. He steps in a dream, in this case, Abimelech's dream, to preserve his plan. Even when his chosen vessels fail, God is still ultimately in control. Amen? And what a blessing and hope for us to rest in, that he is in control. I pray that we can all rest in this hope, that God is there, he is present, he is in control, and he will preserve his plan in our lives despite our faults and despite our failures.